Hello and welcome to The Essential Reads. My name is Isaac and my goal is to bring to you a bunch of classic audiobooks in an easy and accessible way. We are continuing with North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, and this is chapter 28. Comfort in Sorrow. Through cross to crown. And though thy spirit's life, trials untold assail with giant strength, good cheer. Good cheer, soon ends the bitter strife, and thou shalt reign in peace with Christ at length. Kossegarten. Aye, sooth, we feel too strong in weal, to need thee on that road. But woe being come, the soul is dumb that crieth not on God. Mrs. Browning. That afternoon she walked swiftly to the Higgins' house. Mary was looking out for her father with a half-distrustful face. Margaret smiled into her eyes to reassure her. They passed quickly through the houseplace, upstairs, and into the quiet presence of the dead. Then Margaret was glad she had come. The face, so often weary with pain, so restless with troublous thoughts, had now the faint soft smile of eternal rest upon it. The slow tears gathered into Margaret's eyes, but a deep calm entered into her soul. And that was death. It looked more peaceful than life. All beautiful scriptures came into her mind. They rest from their labours. The weary are at rest. He giveth his beloved sleep. Slowly, Margaret turned away from the bed. Mary was humbly sobbing in the background. They went downstairs without a word. Resting his hand upon the table, Nicholas Higgins stood in the midst of the floor, his great eyes startled open by the news he had heard as he came along the court from many busy tongues. His eyes were dry and fierce. Studying the reality of her death, bringing himself to understand that her place should know no more. For she had been sickly, dying so long, that he had persuaded himself she would not die, that she would pull through. Margaret felt as though she had no business to be there, familiarly acquainting herself with the surroundings of death, which he, the father, had only just learnt. There had been the pause of an instant on the steep, crooked stair when she first saw him. But now she tried to steal past his abstracted gaze, and to leave him to the solemn circle of his household misery. Mary sat down on the first chair she came to, and throwing her apron over her head, began to cry. The noise appeared to rouse him. He took sudden hold of Margaret's arm and held her till he could gather words to speak. His throat seemed dry. They came up thick and choked and hoarse. Were you with her? Did you see her die? No, replied Margaret, standing still with the utmost patience, now she found herself perceived. It was some time before he spoke again, but he kept his hold on her arm. All men must die, said he at last, with a strange sort of gravity, which first suggested to Margaret the idea that he had been drinking. Not enough to intoxicate himself, but enough to make his thoughts bewildered. But she were younger than me. Still he pondered over the event, not looking at Margaret, though he grasped her tight. Suddenly, he looked up at her with a wild, searching inquiry in his glance. "You're sure and certain she's dead? Not in a dwam? A faint? She's been so before. Often." "She is dead," replied Margaret. Still she felt no fear in speaking to him, though he hurt her arm with his gripe, and wild gleams came across into the stupidity of his eyes. "She is dead!" He looked at her still with that searching look, which seemed to fade out of his eyes as he gazed. Then he suddenly let go his hold of Margaret, and, throwing his body half across the table, he shook it and every piece of furniture in the room with his violent sobs. Mary came trembling towards him. "Get thee gone!" he cried, striking wildly and blindly at her. "What do I care for thee?" Margaret took her hand and held it softly in hers. He tore his hair, he beat his head against the hard wood. Then he lay exhausted and stupid. Still his daughter and Margaret did not move. Mary trembled from head to foot. At last, it might have been a quarter of an hour. It might have been an hour. He lifted himself up. His eyes were swollen and bloodshot, and he seemed to have forgotten that anyone was by. He scowled at the watchers when he saw them. He shook himself heavily, gave them one more sullen look, spoke never a word, but made for the door. "Oh, father! Oh, father!" said Mary, throwing herself upon his arm. "Not tonight! Any night but tonight! Oh, help me! He's going out to drink again! Father, I'll not leave you! You may strike, but I'll not leave you! She told me last of all to keep you from drink." But Margaret stood in the doorway, silent, yet commanding. He looked up at her defyingly. "It's my house! Stand out of the way, wench, or I'll make you!" He had shaken off Mary with violence. He looked ready to strike Margaret. But she never moved a feature, never took her deep, serious eyes off him. He stared back on her with gloomy fierceness. If she had stirred hand or foot, he would have thrust her aside with even more violence than he had used to his own daughter, whose face was bleeding from her fall against a chair. "What are you looking at me in that way for?" he asked her at last, daunted and awed by her severe calm. "If you think for to keep me from going what gate I choose, because she loved you, and in my house too, where I never asked you to come, you're mistaken. It's very hard upon a man that he can't go to the only comfort left." Margaret felt that he acknowledged her power. What could she do next? He had seated himself on a chair, close to the door, half conquered, half resenting, intending to go out as soon as she left her position, but unwilling to use the violence he had threatened not 5 minutes before. Margaret laid her hand on his arm. "Come with me," she said. "Come and see her." The voice in which she spoke was very low and solemn, but there was no fear or doubt expressed in it, either of him or of his compliance. He sullenly rose up. He stood uncertain, with dogged irresolution upon his face. She waited him there, quietly, patiently waited for his time to move. He had a strange pleasure in making her wait. But at last he moved towards the stairs. She and he stood by the corpse. "Her last words to Mary were keep my father from drink." "I canna hurt her now," muttered he. "Naught can hurt her now." Then, raising his voice to a wailing cry, he went on. "And we may quarrel and fall out, we may make peace and be friends, and we may clem to skin and bone, and not all our grease will ever touch her more, who's had a portion on 'em. What with our work first and sickness at last, who led the life of a dog? And to die without knowing one good piece of rejoicing in all her days. Nay, wench, whatever who said, who can know naught about it now, and I mun ha' supper drink just to steady me against sorrow. No, said Margaret, softening with his softened manner. You shall not. If her life has been what you say, at any rate she did not fear death as some do. Oh, you should have heard her speak of the life to come, the life hidden with God that she is now gone to. He shook his head, glancing sideways up at Margaret as he did so. His pale, haggard face struck her painfully. You are sorely tired. Where have you been all day? Not at work? Not at work, sure enough, said he, with a short, grim laugh. Not at what you call work. I were at the committee till I was sicking out with trying to make fools of reason. I were fetched a butcher's wife afore 7 this morning. She's bedfast, but she were raving and raging to know where her dunner-headed brute of a chap was, as if I'd to keep him, as if he were fit to be ruled by me, the fool who has put his foot in all our plans. And I've walked my sore feet with going about for to see men who wouldn't be seen, and now the law is raised against us. And I was sore-hearted too, which is worse than sore-footed. And if I did see a friend who was to treat me, I never knew who lay a-dying here. Bless lass, thou believe me, thou wouldst. Wouldstn't thou? Turning to the poor dumb form with wild appeal. I am sure, said Margaret. I am sure you did not know. It was quite sudden. But now, you see, it would be different. You know, you do see her lying there. You hear what she said with her last breath. You will not go? No answer. In fact, where was he to look for comfort? Come home with me, she said at last, with a bold venture, half trembling at her own proposal as she made it. At least you will have some comfortable food, which I'm sure you need. Your father's a parson? Asked he, with a sudden turn in his ideas. He was, said Margaret shortly. I'll go and make a dish of tea with him, since you've asked me. I've many a thing I often wished to say to a parson. I'm not particular as to whether he's preaching now or not. Margaret was perplexed. His drinking tea with her father, who would be totally unprepared for his visitor. Her mother, so ill, seemed utterly out of the question. And yet, if she drew back now, it would be worse than ever, sure to drive him to the gin shop. She thought that if she could only get him to their house, it was so great a step gained that she would trust to the chapter of accidents for the next. Goodbye, old wench. We parted company at last, we have. But thou'st been a blessing to thy father ever sin thou wert born. Bless thy white lips, lass. They've a smile on 'em now, and I'm glad to see it once again, though I'm lone and forlorn evermore. He stooped down and fondly kissed his daughter, covered up her face, and turned to follow Margaret. She had hastily gone downstairs to tell Mary of the arrangement, to say it was the only place she could think of to keep him from the gin palace, to urge Mary to come too, for her heart smote her at the idea of leaving the poor affectionate girl alone. But Mary had friends amongst the neighbours, she said, who would come in and sit a bit with her. it was all right. But her father, he was there by them, or she would have spoken more. He had shaken off his emotions, as if ashamed of having ever given way to it, and had even overleapt himself so much that he assumed a sort of bitter mirth, like the crackling of thorns under a pot. "I'm going to take my tea with her father, I am." But he slouched his cap low down over his brow as he went into the street, and looked neither to the left nor to the right while he tramped along by Margaret's side. He feared being upset by the words, still more the looks, of sympathizing neighbors. So he and Margaret walked in silence. As he got near the street in which he knew she lived, he looked down at his clothes, his hands, his shoes. "I should map and clean myself first." It certainly would have been desirable, but Margaret assured him he should be allowed to go into the yard and have soap and a towel provided. She would not let him slip out of her hands just then. While he followed the house servant along the passage and through the kitchen, stepping cautiously on every dark mark in the pattern of the oilcloth in order to conceal his dirty footprints, Margaret ran upstairs. She met Dixon on the landing. "How is Mamma? Where is Papa?" Mrs. was tired and had gone into her own room. She had wanted to go to bed, but Dixon had persuaded her to lie down on the sofa and have her tea brought to her there. It would be better than getting restless by being too long in bed. So far, so good. But where was Mr. Hale? In the drawing room. Margaret went in, half breathless with the hurried story she had to tell. Of course, she told it incompletely, and her father was rather taken aback by the idea of the drunken weaver awaiting him in his quiet study, with whom he was expected to drink tea, and on whose behalf Margaret was anxiously pleading. The meek, kind-hearted Mr. Hale would have readily tried to console him in his grief. But, unluckily, the point Margaret dwelt upon was most forcibly the fact of his having been drinking, and her having brought him home with her as a last expedient to keep him from the gin shop. One little event had come out of another so naturally that Margaret was hardly conscious of what she had done till she saw the slight look of repugnance on her father's face. "Oh, Papa, he really is a man you will not dislike, if you won't be shocked to begin with." "But, Margaret, to bring a drunken man home, and your mother so ill." Margaret's countenance fell. "I am sorry, Papa. He is very quiet. He is not tipsy at all. He was only rather strange at first, but that might be the shock of poor Bessy's death." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Hale took hold of her sweet, pleading face in both his hands and kissed her forehead. "It's all right, dear. I'll go and make him as comfortable as I can, and do you attend to your mother. Only, if you can come in and make a third in the study, I shall be glad." "Oh, yes, thank you." But as Mr. Hale was leaving the room, she ran after him. "Papa, you must not wonder at what he says. He does not believe much in what we do." "Oh, dear, a drunken infidel weaver," said Mr. Hale to himself in dismay. But to Margaret he only said, "If your mother goes to sleep, be sure you come directly." Margaret went into her mother's room. Mrs. Hale lifted herself up from a doze. "When did you write to Frederick, Margaret? Yesterday or the day before?" "Yesterday, Mamma." "Yesterday. And the letter went?" "Yes, I took it myself." "Oh, Margaret, I'm so afraid of his coming. If he should be recognized, if he should be taken, if he should be executed after all these years that he has kept away and lived in safety. I keep falling asleep and dreaming he is caught and being tried. Oh, Mamma, don't be afraid. There will be some risk, no doubt, but we will lessen it as much as ever we can. And it is so little. Now, if we were at Helston, there would be 20, 100 times as much. There, everybody would remember him. And if there was a stranger known to be in the house, they would be sure to guess it was Frederick. While here, nobody knows or cares for us to notice what we do. Dixon will keep the door like a dragon. Won't you, Dixon? While he is here. They'll be clever if they come past me, said Dixon, showing her teeth at the bare idea. And he need not go out, except in the dusk, poor fellow. Poor fellow, echoed Mrs. Hale. But I almost wish you had not written. Would it be too late to stop him if you wrote again, Margaret? I am afraid it would, Mamma, said Margaret, remembering the urgency with which she had entreated him to come directly if he wished to see his mother alive. I always dislike that doing things in a hurry, said Mrs. Hale. Margaret was silent. Come now, ma'am, said Dixon with a kind of cheerful authority. You know seeing Master Frederick is just the very thing of all others you're longing for. And I'm glad Miss Margaret wrote straight off without shilly-shallying. I've had a great mind to do it myself. And we'll keep him snug, depend on it. There's only Martha in the house that would not do a good deal to save him on a pinch. And I've been thinking she might go and see her mother just at that very time. She's been saying once or twice she should like to go, for her mother has had a stroke since she came here. Only she didn't like to ask. But I'll see about her being safe off as soon as we know when she comes. God bless him. So take your tea, ma'am, in comfort, and to trust me. Mrs. Hale did trust in Dixon more than in Margaret. Dixon's words quieted her for the time. Margaret poured out the tea in silence, trying to think of something agreeable to say. But her thoughts made answer something like Daniel O'Rourke when the man in the moon asked him to get off his reaping hook. The more you ax us, the more we won't stir. The more she tried to think of something, anything besides the dangers to which Frederick would be exposed, the more closer her imagination clung to the unfortunate idea presented to her. Her mother prattled with Dixon, and seemed to have utterly forgotten the possibility of Frederick being tried and executed, utterly forgotten that at her wish, if by Margaret's deed, he was summoned into this danger. Her mother was one of those who throw out terrible possibilities, miserable probabilities, unfortunate chances of all kinds, as a rocket throws out sparks. But if the sparks light on some combustible matter, they smoulder first, and burst out into a frightful flame at last. Margaret was glad when, her filial duties gently and carefully performed, she could go down into the study. She wondered how her father and Higgins had got on. In the first place, the decorous, kind-hearted, simple, old-fashioned gentleman had unconsciously called out, by his own refinement and courteousness of manner, all the latent courtesy in the other. Mr. Hale treated all his fellow creatures alike. It never entered into his head to make any difference because of their rank. He placed a chair for Nicholas, stood up till he, at Mr. Hale's request, took a seat, and called him invariably Mr. Higgins, instead of the curt Nicholas or Higgins to which the drunken infidel weaver had been accustomed. But Nicholas was neither a habitual drunkard nor a thorough infidel. He drank to drown care, as he would have himself expressed it. And he was an infidel, so far as he had never yet found any form of faith to which he could attach himself, heart and soul. Margaret was a little surprised, and very much pleased, when she found her father and Higgins in earnest conversation, each speaking with gentle politeness to the other, however their opinions might clash. Nicholas, clean, tidied, if only at the pump trough, and quiet-spoken, was a new creature to her, who had only seen him in the rough independence of his own hearthstone. He had slicked his hair down with the fresh water. He had adjusted his neck handkerchief, and borrowed an odd candle end to polish his clogs with. And there he sat, enforcing some opinion on her father, with a strong Darkshire accent, it is true, but with a lowered voice, and a good, earnest composure on his face. Her father, too, was interested in what his companion was saying. He looked round as she came in, smiled, and quietly gave her his chair, and then sat down afresh as quickly as possible, and with a little bow of apology to his guest for the interruption. Higgins nodded to her as a sign of greeting, and she softly adjusted her working materials on the table and prepared to listen. As I was saying, sir, I reckon you'd not have much belief in you if you lived here, if you'd been bred here. Ask your pardon if I use the wrong words, but what I mean by belief just now is a thinking on sayings and maxims and promises made by folk you never saw, about the things and the life you never saw, nor no one else. Now, you say these are true things, and true sayings, and a true life. I just say, where's the proof? There's many and many a one wiser, and scores better learned than I am around me. Folk have had time to think on these things, while my time has to be getting up to get my bread. Well, I sees these people. Their lives is pretty much open to me. They're real folk. They don't believe in the Bible. Not they. They may say they do, for form's sake. But Lord, sir, do you think their first cry in the morning is, what shall I do to get hold on eternal life? Or, what shall I do to fill my purse this blessed day? Where shall I go? What bargain shall I strike? The purse and the gold and the notes is real things. Things that can be felt and touched. Them's realities. And eternal life is all talk. Very fit for. Ask your pardon, sir. You're a parson's out of work, I believe. Well, I'll never speak disrespectful of a man in the same fix as I am myself. But I'll just ask you another question, sir. And I dunno when you answer it. Only to put in your pipe and smoke it afore you go to set us down, who only believe in what we see as fools and noddies. If salvation and life to come and what not was true, not in men's words, but in men's hearts' core, dun you not think they'd din us with it as they do with political economy? They're mighty anxious to come round us with that piece of wisdom, but t'other would be a greater comparison if it were true. But the masters have nothing to do with your religion. All that they are connected with you is in trade, so they think. And all that it concerns them, therefore, to rectify your opinions is in the silence of trade. I'm glad, sir, said Higgins, with a curious wink of his eye, that you put it in so they think. I'd have thought you a hypocrite. I'm afeard if you hadn't, for all you're a parson, or rather, because you're a parson. You see, if you'd spoken of religion as a thing that, if it was true, it didn't concern all men, to press on all men's attention above everything else in this vast earth, I should have thought you a knave to be a parson. And I'd rather think you're a fool than a knave. No offence, I hope, sir. None at all. You consider me mistaken, and I consider you far more fatally mistaken. I don't expect to convince you in a day, not in one conversation. But let us know each other, and speak freely to each other about these things, and the truth will prevail. I should not believe in God if I did not believe in that. Mr. Higgins, I trust, whatever else you have given up, you believe... Mr. Hale's voice dropped low in reverence. You believe in him. Nicholas Higgins suddenly stood straight, stiff up. Margaret started to her feet, for she thought, by the working of his face, he was going into convulsion. Mr. Hale looked at her dismayed. At last, Higgins found words. "Man, I could fell you to the ground for tempting me. Whatten business have you to try me with your doubts? Think of her lying there, after the life who's led. And think then how you'd deny me the one sole comfort left. That there is a God, and that he set her life. I do not believe she'll ever live again," said he, sitting down and drearily going on, as if to the unsympathizing fire. "I do not believe in any other life than this, in which she dreed such trouble, and had such never-ending care. And I cannot bear to think that it were all a set of chance, that might have been altered with a breath of wind. There's many a time when I thought I didna believe in God, but I've never put it fair out before me in words as many men do. I may have laughed at those who did, to brave it out like, but I've looked round after to see if he heard me. And if so be there was a he. But today, when I'm left desolate, I will not listen to you with your questions and your doubts. There's but one thing steady and quiet in all this reeling world, and reason or no reason, I'll cling to that. It's all very well for happy folk." Margaret touched his arm very softly. She had not spoken before, nor had he heard her rise. "Nicholas, we do not want to reason. You misunderstand my father. We do not want reason. We believe. And so do you. It is the one sole comfort at such times." He turned round and caught her hand. "Ah, it is, brushing away the tears with the back of his hand. "But, she's lying dead at home, and I'm welly dazed with sorrow, and at times I hardly know what I'm saying. It's as if speeches folk are made, clever and smart things as I've thought at the time, come up now upon my heart's welly blossom. The strike failed as well. Don't you know that, miss? I were coming home to ask her, like a beggar, for a bit of comfort in that trouble, and I were knocked down by one who telled me she were dead. Just dead. That were all. But that were enough for me." Mr. Hale blew his nose and got up to snuff the candles in order to conceal his emotion. "He's not an infidel, Margaret. How could you say so?" muttered he reproachfully. "I've a good mind to read him the 14th chapter of Job." "Not yet, Papa, I think. Perhaps not at all. Let us ask him about the strike, and give him all the sympathy he needs and hoped to have from poor Bessy." So they questioned and listened. The workmen's calculations were based, like too many of the masters, on false premises. They reckoned on their fellow men as if they possessed the calculable powers of machines. No more, no less. No allowance for human passions getting the better of reason, as in the case of Butcher and the rioters, and believing that the representations of their injuries would have the same effect on strangers far away as the injuries, fancied or real, had upon themselves. They were consequently surprised and indignant at the poor Irish, who had allowed themselves to be imported and brought over to take their places. This indignation was tempered in some degree by contempt for them Irishers, and by pleasure at the idea of the bungling way in which they would set to work, and perplex their new masters with their ignorance and stupidity. Strange, exaggerated stories of which were already spreading through the town. But the most cruel cut of all was that of the Milton workers, who had defied and disobeyed the commands of the Union to keep peace, whatever came. Who had originated discord in the camp, and spread the panic of the law being arrayed against them. "And so the strike is at an end," said Margaret. Aye, miss. It's safe as safe can. The factory doors will need open wide tomorrow, to let in all who'll be axing for work. If it's only just to show that they'd naught to do with the measure, which if we'd been made of the right stuff, would have brought wages up to a point they'd not been at this 10 year.
You'll get work, shan't you? Asked Margaret. You're a famous workman, are you not?
Amper'll not let me in his mill when he cuts off his right hand. Not before, not after, said Nicholas quietly.
Margaret was silenced and sad. About the wages, said Mr. Hale. You'll not be offended, but I think you made some sad mistakes. I should like you to read some remarks in a book I have. He got up and went to his bookshelf.
You needn't trouble yourself, sir, said Nicholas. Their book stuff goes in at one ear and comes out at other. I can make naught on't. Afore Amper and me had this split, the overlooker told him I was stirring up to make the men ask for higher wages, and Amper met me one day in the yard. He'd a thin book in his hand, and says he, Higgins, I'm told you're one of those damned fools that thinks you can get higher wages for asking for 'em. Aye, and keep 'em up too, when you've forced 'em up. Now, I'll give you a chance and try if you've any sense in you. Here's a book written by a friend of mine, and if you'll read it, you'll see how wages find their own level without either masters or men having aught to do with them. Except the men cut their own throats with striking, like the confounded noodles they are. Well, now, sir, I put it to you being a parson, and having been in the preaching line, and having had to try and bring folk over to what you thought was a right way of thinking. Did you begin by calling them fools and such like? Or didn't you rather give 'em such kind words at first, to make 'em ready for to listen, and be convinced, if they could? And in your preaching, did you ever stop now and then and say after them and after yourself? But you're such a pack of fools that I've a strong notion it's no use me trying to put sense into you. I were not in the best state, I'll own, for taking in Amper, for taking in what Amper's friend had to say. I was so vexed at the way they were put to me. But I thought, come, I'll see what these chaps has got to say, and try if it's them or me as is the noodle. So I took the book and tugged at it. But Lord bless you, it went on about capital and labour and capital, till it fair sent me off to sleep. I ne'er could rightly fix in my mind which was which, and it spoke on 'em as if they was virtues or vices. And what I wanted to know were the rights of men, whether they were rich or poor, so be they only were men. But for all that, said Mr. Hale, and granting to the full offensiveness, the folly, the unchristianness of Mr. Hamper's way of speaking to you in recommending his friend's book, yet if it told you what he said it did, that wages find their own level, and that the most successful strike can only force them up for a moment, to sink in far greater proportion afterwards, in consequence of that very strike, the book would have told you the truth. Well, sir, said Higgins rather doggedly, it might or it might not. There's two opinions to go settling that point. But suppose it were truth double strong, it were no truth to me if I couldn't take it in. I dare say there's a great truth in yon Latin book on your shelf, but it's gibberish and not truth to me, unless I know the meaning of the words. If you, sir, or any other knowledgeable patient man comes to me and says he'll larn me what the words mean, and not blow me up if I'm a bit stupid, or forget how one thing hangs on another, why in time I may get to see the truth of it, or I may not. I'll not be bound to say I shall end in thinking the same as any man, and I'm not one who thinks truth can be shaped out in words, all neat and clean, as the men at the foundry cut out sheet iron. Same bones won't go down with everyone. It'll stick here in this man's throat, and there in t'others. Let alone that, when down, it may be too strong for this one, too weak for that. Folk who set up to doctor the world with their truth mun suit different for different mans, and be a bit tender in the way of giving it too, or the poor sick fools may spit out in their faces. Now Amper first gives me a box on me ear, and then he throws his big bolus at me, and says he reckons it'll do me no good. I'm such a fool. But there it is.
I wish that some of the kindest, wisest of the masters would meet some of you men, and have a good talk on these things. It would, surely, be the best way of getting over your difficulties, which, I do believe, arise from your ignorance. Excuse me, Mr. Higgins, on subjects which it is for the mutual interest of both masters and men should be well understood by both. I wonder, half to his daughter, if Mr. Thornton might not be induced to do such a thing. Remember, Papa, she said in a very low voice, what he said the other day, about governments, you know.
She was unwilling to make any clearer allusions to the conversation they held on the mode of governing work people, by giving men intelligence enough to rule themselves, or by a wise despotism on the part of the masters. For she saw that Higgins had caught Mr. Thornton's name, if not the whole speech. Indeed, he began to speak of him. Thornton! He's the chap as wrote off at once for these Irishers, and led to the rats that ruined the strike. Even Amper, with all his bullying, would have waited a while. But it's a word and a blow with Thornton. And now, when the Union would have thanked him for following up the chase after Butcher, and them chaps as went right again our commands, it's Thornton who steps forward and coolly says that, as the strike's at an end, he, as partly injured, doesn't want to press the charge against the rioters. I thought he'd have carried the point and had his revenge in an open way. But, says he, one in court told me his very words, they are well known, and they will find the natural punishment of their conduct in the difficulty they will meet in getting employed. That'll be severe enough. I only wish they cotched Butcher and had him up before Amper. I see the old tiger setting on him. Would he have let him off? Not he.
Mr. Thornton was right, said Margaret. You are very angry against Butcher, Nicholas. Or else you would be the first to see that where the natural punishment would be severe enough for the offences, any further punishment would be something like revenge. My daughter is no great friend of Mr. Thornton's, said Mr. Hale, smiling at Margaret, while she, as red as any carnation, began to work with double diligence. But I believe what she says is the truth. I like him for it.
Well, sir, this strike has been a wary bit of business to me, and you'll not wonder if I'm a bit put out with seeing it fail just for a few men who would now suffer in silence, and hold out brave and firm.
You forget, said Margaret. I don't know much of Butcher, but the only time I saw him it was not his own suffering he spoke of, but those of his sick wife, his little children.
True, but he were not made of iron himself. He'd have cried out for his own sorrows next. He were not one to bear.
How came he into the Union? Asked Margaret innocently. You don't seem to have much respect for him, nor gained much good from having him.
Higgins' brow clouded. He was silent for a minute or two. Then he said, shortly enough, It is not for me to speak of the Union. They does what they does. Them that is of a tradesman hang together. And if they're not willing to take their chance along with the rest, the Union has ways and means. Mr. Hale saw that Higgins was vexed at the turn their conversation had taken, and was silent. Not so Margaret, though she saw Higgins's feelings as clearly as he did. By instinct, she felt that if he could but be brought to express himself in plain words, something clear would be gained on which to argue for the right and just. And what are the Union's ways and means? He looked up at her, as if on the point of dogged resistance to her wish for information. But her calm face, fixed on his, patient and trustful, compelled him to answer. Well, if a man doesn't belong to the union, them as works next looms as orders not to speak to him. If he's sorry or ill, it's the same. He's out of bounds. He's none of us. He comes among us, he works among us, but he's none of us. Ah, some places them's fand who speaks to him. Ah, you try that, miss. Try living a year or two among them as looks away if you look at 'em. Try working within 2 yards of crowds of men who, you know, have a grinding grudge at you in their hearts. To 'em, if you say you're glad, not an eye brightens nor a lip moves. To 'em, if your heart's heavy, you can never say naught, because they'll ne'er take notice of your sighs or sad looks. And a man's no man who'll groan out loud about folk asking him what's the matter. Just you try that, miss. 10 hours for 300 days, and you'll know a bit what the union is.
Why, said Margaret, what tyranny this is! Nay, Higgins, I don't care one straw for your anger. I know you can't be angry with me if you would, and I must tell you the truth, that I never read, in all the history I have read, of a more slow, lingering torture than this. And you belong to the Union, and you talk of the tyranny of the masters.
Nay, said Higgins. You may say what you like. The dead stand between you and every angry word of mine. Do you think I forget who's lying there, and how who loved you? And it's the masters as made us sin, if the union is a sin. Not this generation, maybe, but their fathers. Their fathers ground our fathers to the very dust, ground to powder. Parsons. I reckon I've heard my mother read out a text. The fathers have eaten our sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. It's so with them. In those days of sore oppression, the unions began. They were a necessity. It is a necessity now, according to me. It's a withstanding of injustice, past, present, or to come. It may be like war, along with it come crimes. But I think it were a greater crime to let it alone. Our only chance is binding men together in one common interest. And if some are cowards and some are fools, they mun come along and join the great march, whose only strength is in numbers.
Oh, said Mr. Hale, sighing, your union in itself would be beautiful, glorious. It would be Christianity itself, if it were but for an end which affected the good of all, instead of that of merely one class as opposed to another.
I reckon it's time for me to be going, sir, said Higgins as the clock struck 10.
Home?
Said Margaret very softly. He understood her, and took her offered hand. Home, miss. You may trust me, though I am one of the union.
I do trust you most thoroughly, Nicholas. Stay, said Mr. Hale, hurrying to the bookshelf. Mr. Higgins, I'm sure you'll join us in family prayer?
Higgins looked at Margaret doubtfully. Her grave, sweet eyes met his. There was no compulsion, only deep interest in them. He did not speak, but kept his place. Margaret, the churchwoman. Her father, the dissenter. Higgins, the infidel, knelt down together. It did them no harm. Thank you so very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, share, all that jazz. And if you really enjoyed, do subscribe because there is more to come. If you're listening on podcast, please leave a review as it's the easiest way to get this in front of as many people as possible, and reading your reviews really, really makes my day. If you want to support the show further, there is a Ko-Fi link like here on screen. Or you can find the same link in the description box. It's just a direct way to donate towards the show to help me keep doing this. You can also do direct donations on YouTube if you want to do that, but if you want to do something that's free that would also support me incredibly, it would just be to pop the show on your podcast platform of choice while you're asleep and help me get the monetization listening hours requirements that I need there. It would truly, truly be life-changing for me if I were able to unblock monetization options on podcast platforms. Once again, thank you so, so very much for listening. And until next time, bye-bye.